Welcome to the Terraria Whips Guide. This guide is going to go over all the whips in Terraria currently, how to get them, their availability, all their unique abilities, their damage, the speed, and we're going to do a test on King Slime for each whip. We're also going to be using the Sanguine Staff for these tests, 2 of them. And alright, let's get started with the pre-hard mode whips. The first whip we have is the Leather Whip. It does 14 summon damage. It has extremely weak knockback, and then does 4 summon tag damage. And it's probably the first whip you're going to get if you decide to get it. You buy it from the zoologist. Once you fill out 10% of the bestiary, of course you can only get the zoologist once 10% of the bestiary is filled out. So once you get her, you can go ahead and buy that. A lot of people skip over this whip because you have to have the zoologist NPC to get it, and that's totally understandable. So, first whip of the game, very simple, pretty weak. Let's test it against King Slime. Alright, that's the first whip out of the way. This isn't a master mode world, so everything will be against the master mode boss. I'm not wearing any accessories or armor that will improve the quality of my whips. As you can see right now, we're using not the full set of molten armor, and all these accessories do not have any buffs for damage or melee speed or anything like that. And all of the whips are default with no reforge on any of them. So, moving on to the next whip, we have the Snapthorn. The Snapthorn is probably the first whip you're going to get. I know I just said that about the Leather Whip, but a lot of people skip over the Leather Whip for the Snapthorn because it's almost easier to get. All the materials are found in the jungle. It takes 12 stingers, 3 jungle spores, and 3 jungle vines at an iron or lead anvil, and it does 18 summon damage, 6 summon tag damage, and it also has a couple unique abilities. I'll go over those right now. It has a speed buff. When you hit an enemy, you get the Jungle's Fury buff, and it does a 20% speed increase. Obviously, you'll see that during the fight. And it also inflicts the poison debuff, which applies to most enemies in the game. With that out of the way, let's start the fight. Holy shit. As you can see, it's already way better than the Leather Whip. That's why so many people skip over the Leather Whip. Because the Leather Whip is pretty inconvenient to get, and it's just not that good. Where the Snapthorn is a couple of trips into the jungle, you might die, but it is definitely worth it. I am not using an auto swing. I would recommend getting the Feral Claws if you're going to be using whips. It helps out so much. It makes it so much easier. But I will be single clicking for all of these fights just to show the original whip. Pretty good whip in pre-hard mode. Definitely the best early hard mode whip. Pre-hard mode whip, my bad. But not the best one. Moving on, we have the Spinal Tap. The best pre-hard mode whip. It's fairly easy to acquire, but it is only acquired post-Skeletron. Unless you're in a drunk world or you have a weird dungeon spawn where you could somehow get bones before you kill Skeletron. But usually you're going to have to kill Skeletron first. It takes 55 cobwebs and 90 bones at a workbench. It does 29 summon damage. Again, weak knockback like every whip. 7 summon tag damage, and it apparently performs better against multiple targets than most whips. That's what the tooltip says. And let's test it against King Slime. One thing I'm gonna have to do in the future is get a journey mode character with the game completed, so I don't have to, so I can do this with God mode on for more accurate tests. And that concludes all the pre-hardboiled whips. Not that many. There's only 3, and you usually don't even use one, so there's only 2. But that's all 3 of them. 2 very solid whips, 1 not so solid whip. But onto the hard mode whips. This is when the whips start getting pretty good right into hard mode. And we're going to start off with the Firecracker. It is obtained from the Wall of Flesh, from the treasure bag, or if you're in classic mode, just from the drop. And it does 40 summon damage and the no summon tag damage, which is kind of weird, but it's what it is. And its special ability is it does blazing energy, and I'll show you really quick. My summons will now explode when they hit an enemy, or the damage will explode. Pretty simple, pretty cool, and I'm a very, very good early hard mode whip. Let's test it against King Slime. And I'm probably the first whip you're going to be using in hard mode. A lot of people stick with this whip for a while before moving on. I did not use this next whip in my summon playthrough, but I'm going to show it to you now. It's the Cool Whip, which is obtained from 8 Souls of Night, 8 Souls of Light, and 1 Frost Core at a Mithril or a Calcommand bill. So you can get it pretty much. It's the next whip you can get into hard mode pre-mech. And it summons this little snowflake that does damage. Of course, it's a full moon, so we're gonna have to deal with werewolves now. Awesome. The Cool Whip does 50 summon damage. And again, no summon tag damage. Kind of weird. And the snowflake that it spawns in will ignore 30 enemy defense, and it stays as long as you keep whipping. So if I whip, it'll stay, and then if I stop, obviously it'll go away. But if I keep whipping, it'll pretty much stay there as long as my whip is making contact with an enemy. And then when the enemy dies and there's no more enemies, snowflake will go away. So you will see the snowflake for the majority of the fight. I'm gonna go sleep the night away really quick, and we'll be back in the daytime. Alright, we are back. It's daytime in my Terraria world, so we'll get right back to the testing of the Cool Whip. Right before I start, I want to mention that the Cool Whip does apply the Frostburn debuff. I don't think it says that in the tooltip. It does say it summons the snowflake, but it doesn't say it affects the Frostburn debuff, but we'll test that out. Yeah, you can see it does affect the Frostburn debuff and the snowflake. So that's a nice little added DPS. But let's get on with the King Slime test. And now one thing that we're not seeing is the snowflake isn't really attacking King Slime, it's attacking random slimes. Nothing I can do about that right now. But you can see that it does well against a group of enemies, especially with the snowflake and the frostburn. I mean, look at that compared to the firecracker. I use the firecracker. I didn't want to go through the trouble of getting the frostburn, but they're both really good whips for early hard mode. The Cool Whip could be arguably better with 10 more summon damage, so keep that in mind in your next playthrough. And next we have the Durendal, which is crafted from 12 hollow bars, which means you have to kill at least 1 mech boss before you can get that. It does 55 summon damage and 9 summon tag damage. And one thing, the only unique ability it does have is, it says in the tooltip, strike enemies to gain attack speed, which is true. You get a 35% speed increase whenever you hit an enemy. And it's a pretty fast whip, and when you hit an enemy, it gets noticeably faster. Pair this with the Pharaoh Claws, and your whip will go insane. And let's test it on King Slime. You'll see how fast this whip can get. Alright, as you saw, the whip did get pretty fast. It's even faster with Pharaoh Claws. Again, I'm not doing any of this with auto swing. I wanted to, but that's not really showing the whip's true nature. Some people don't use Pharaoh Claws, although I would highly recommend it if you're going to be doing a Terraria Summoner playthrough. It only takes up 1 accessory slot, and it's really worth it. So that was the Durendal, and then next we have the Morning Star, which is a very, very slow whip. If you don't have Pharaoh Claws or melee speed buffs, I mean, it's kind of insane. It's a post-Plantera whip, which means you're... Okay, we're gonna go straight to the King Slime test right now, because he just spawned in while I'm explaining, so I guess I'll go right now while he's here. 180 summon damage, that is the highest base damage out of all the whips, but it is extremely slow, as you can see, but it does insane damage. And one thing it does is, it's the only whip that really has insane knockback. Like, you can see I'm smacking slimes around right now, except for King Slime. And it's kind of insane for single targets, especially single targets that take knockback. And yeah, it's insane damage makes up for and knockback makes up for the extremely slow speed. 180 summon damage, 5 summon tag damage, and it is one of the 2 whips that has 5% summon tag critical strike chance. You probably saw in that King Slime fight that there was some critical hits. Maybe not a lot, but there was some. And that was the Morning Star. Not a lot of people use it because it is very slow, but it's a very reliable whip, and it's obtained in the post-Plantera dungeon. It's a 0.5% drop chance from Blue Armored Bones, Hell Armored Bones, and a Rusty Armored Bones. So you might be able to get this right after you kill Plantera, so you might use it for a little bit before you get one of the next 2 whips. Speaking of that, let's move on to the next 2 whips, the Dark Harvest, which is a post-Plantera whip. You get it through Pumpkin, which spawns in the Pumpkin Moon. And it's a very good whip for crowd control because of the dark energy it drops. You hit an enemy, I'll try to show you really quick, and it drops dark energy. Now, I don't believe the energy affects the enemy you hit, but it affects enemies around it. We'll see that very shortly in the King Slime fight. And it also has a speed increase of a 50% speed increase when you hit an enemy, so that's pretty good. We'll see that in the fight as well. And let's start. Now keep an eye out for the dark energy that's hitting other slimes, not King Slime. And the whip is getting noticeably faster from the beginning of the fight. A very good whip, although it has much lower, look at how fast it's going, much lower base damage than the Morning Star. The speed increase and the dark energy buff makes it a very reliable whip, and I would almost recommend it over, I would recommend it over the Morning Star, because I mean, just look at the difference. And when you're hitting an enemy, it goes even faster. So that's the Dark Harvest. And moving on to the last whip and the best whip, it's not really that debatable, it's the Kaleidoscope. It doesn't really have any special abilities besides a 10% critical strike chance for your summons, and summons usually don't have critical strike chance, so that's something nice. It has 180 base damage and 20 summon tag damage, so obviously much better than both of these whips. Although it has no special abilities, the fact that just the high DPS and the critical strike chance, it's really all it needs. And I'm sure it'll tear through King Slime here in a very short manner. If he ever shows up. Yeah. Probably could have done that faster too if I was running left to right instead of standing above him. I'll actually run another test really quick just to show you. I was hitting some slimes instead of the king slime, so look, it'll go much faster this time. Maybe not much faster, but faster nonetheless. And that is going to conclude the whips guide for the current version of Terraria. I'm now going to put on a screen that's going to show the time in seconds that it took each whip to kill King Slime. Obviously the Kaleidoscope took the shortest, and the Leather Whip took the longest. Some of them were closer than I thought, and of course this test isn't 100% accurate to exactly how good each whip is in terms of DPS. And just to leave some final thoughts on what whips you should be using at what time of the game. For pre-hard mode, I would say just go straight for the Snapthorn, and then switch to the Spinal Tap once you defeat Skeletron. And as far as hard mode goes, the Firecracker did very well in the test. As you can see, only 8.4 seconds, better than the Cool Whip and the Durendal. The Durendal is a good whip if you want to use it, but you definitely don't have to. You can keep using the Firecracker all the way to Plantera. And that is when you want to switch to either the Morningstar or the Dark Harvest, really whatever one you can get your hands on first. I think the Dark Harvest is going to be better in most cases, but the Morningstar is more convenient to get if you don't like the Pumpkin Moon, and it has a really high damage. But obviously, as soon as you get the Kaleidoscope, that's going to be the whip you're using for the rest of the game. And that's pretty much going to conclude the whips guide for the current version of Terraria. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it helpful. I really tried to throw everything I could in here. And yeah, I hope you have a good time on your next Summoner playthrough, and make sure to look back at this.